an introduction to a trauma-informed approach. I say introduction because this is a huge topic. We could talk about it for a very long time, certainly for a whole day. In fact, I'm doing that in a couple of weeks with a bunch of youth work degree students, and we've got a whole day to unpack it. And I think even then we probably will only touch the surface. So I know there is not too much time to go too deeply, but what I hope we can do at least is begin to bring a little bit of curiosity to what we mean when we use the word trauma. Because trauma is a little bit of a buzzword, I think, at the minute, that's being used more and more. Feel free to just kind of grab a seat, welcome to those that are coming in. So yeah, hopefully what we will do today is unpack a little what we mean by the word trauma, and I hope get to thinking a little bit about some practical strategies that we can bring as well. I'd like to start by saying we are going to look at we're going to look at trauma, surprisingly, in a seminar that's called Trauma. But we're going to look at some facts, we're going to look at figures, we're going to think about what trauma is. There will be people in this room with lived experience of trauma, and if that's you, please do care for yourself well. If you need to get some time, we're comfortable with just caring well for each other today, I hope. So do what you need to do and look after yourself, and let's be mindful of each other in our conversation as well. So we're going to start by getting a little bit curious and getting our brains online. We're doing pretty well. This is like the slot before lunch, where I don't know about you, but my attention starts to wane a little bit and I start to think about when food's coming. So we're going to press in and we're going to wake up our brains a little bit and hopefully get in the zone. So we are going to start by thinking about some questions. What questions do we bring when we think of the word trauma? What questions pop to our mind? So just on your tables for a minute or two, have you got any why, who, how, when, where, what questions? We may not get to answer many of them, if any of them, but let's start by thinking about what place we are starting from ourselves. When we think of the word trauma, are there questions that might arise in our brains? We just have 1 or 2 minutes on tables, is that okay? I'm not giving you very long because I've already said we're going to go through a lot today. So, I'm not going to get you to shout those questions out, but maybe just hold them. And let's see and let's hope that as we journey together for 50 minutes or so, we can bring that curiosity and maybe seek to extend our thinking a little bit more. So hopefully we're in the zone and we're ready to go. So, what is trauma? Well, one of the best descriptions, is that the right word? Definitions of trauma that I've come across is a lady called Shelley Rambo, who's a trauma theologian. I'm using her quote. I haven't actually read a lot of her stuff, but this quote is good. So she gives a really fairly succinct definition of trauma that I think is helpful, and she describes it as suffering that remains. So an experience of suffering that lingers and continues to affect us in some way. The UK Trauma Council describe it like this. They say that trauma refers to the way that some distressing events are so extreme or intense that they overwhelm a person's ability to cope, resulting in lasting negative effect or impact. And then the UK government advice said this. So they have drawn just a bit of background on this definition. A little while ago, in this area, in the area of kind of understanding trauma, America have done quite a lot of research. And I have been a little bit ahead, I think, in kind of really understanding this a little bit. And so there's a part of the government called SAMHSA, which is to do with substance abuse and mental health. Anyway, they created a definition that lots of countries have gone, yeah, that's good, and adapted, and that's what we've done in the UK. So this kind of draws on the original SAMHSA definition, but this is how we put it here. Trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as harmful or life-threatening. While unique to the individual, generally the experience of trauma can cause lasting adverse effects, limiting the ability to function and achieve mental, physical, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And from this definition, we get the 3 E's of trauma that I find quite helpful to think about: event, experience, and effects. So what we're not saying, and I think sometimes we kind of throw around this term of trauma and just kind of think about the event in and of itself, but actually it goes a bit beyond that. So yes, there is an event, but actually different people will experience different events in different ways, which is why we can have individuals experiencing the same event, and some will be hugely impacted by it and some won't, because there are lots of different things that go on to do with your experience, to do with the support networks that you have around you, lots and lots of things. So it isn't just the event in and of itself, it's how that event is experienced, and then also the effect that that goes on to have. And when we look at those 3 things together, that's what we're looking at when we're looking at trauma. Essentially, those definitions are saying pretty much the same thing. Whichever we find most helpful, I think we can recognise that suffering that remains surrounds us. It is in our schools, it is in our communities, it's in our churches. It breaks down families, it destroys childhoods, it imprisons adulthoods, it hangs around, and it can pass from generation to generation. According to the UK Trauma Council, it's estimated that 1 in 3 children and young people are exposed to at least one potentially traumatic event by the time that they're 18. And the NSPCC estimates that on average 7 children in every classroom experience a form of abuse before they turn 18. 7 children in every classroom, that is nearly a quarter of our children. And when we add to that the trauma of living through a pandemic that has swept through our world, leaving no one untouched, and robbing our kids of vital opportunities for connection and development. And I think it's fair to say that trauma is perhaps more prevalent today than it has ever been in our communities. I realise that that feels like quite a bleak picture. It's reality, and a reality that I think it's important that we're fully aware of, but it is a lot to sit with. But actually stick with me, because it's not the whole picture. So we're just going to kind of do a little bit of a dip into the world of neuroscience. So neuroscience is the scientific study of the brain and the central nervous system. And thanks to new technologies, things like MRI scans, our understanding of neuroscience, how our brains, how our bodies, how our central nervous systems operate has grown exponentially over the last few decades. Advances in neuroscience have given us a greater understanding of the effects that traumatic events can have, not just on our emotional, our spiritual and our mental health, but also on our physical bodies, our physical well-being. I think we've been able to better understand that we are just integrated beings. I think it's no mistake that we're called to love God with our heart, soul, mind and strength. Like right in Scripture, we're told that we're whole beings and that we're integrated and that we work together. And I think a lot of what we're learning through neuroscience is a greater understanding of the beautiful truths that are in Scripture that God's always given us. So while we've been able to see the effect that trauma can have on a child's cognitive processes, things like memory, their attention and their thinking processes, we've seen how it can affect their behaviour responses and their ability to regulate their emotions, to stay in a just right space. And it can cause neurobiological changes in their physical bodies that can have wider health implications. But, and this is the bit to stay with me, there's also been some really good news too in that learning journey, because we've learned that positive relationships with safe caregivers can act as a protective factor for a child in adversity and can mitigate the effects of trauma, making a significant difference to a child or young person. So the charity Young Minds states that the more adults a young person has in their life that they trust and they feel safe talking to, the greater the reduction in their likelihood of developing a mental health condition. This is huge for me, and it's huge for what we do sat in this room today. What a wonderful reminder of the impact that we can have and what a positive difference we can make to every child that we're journeying with in our children's family or youth ministry. A positive relationship with a safe caregiver makes a difference. And it can be a protective factor. It's like putting a bit of armour around kids, just making positive relationships, being safe people, checking in with them. We were looking in the last session, which was brilliant, about welcome. And one of the things that we are really keen to do, partly because if I'm honest, I think it's a bit boring. No offence, and I'm really happy to be here and let's chat. But generally, the fun in the room is when the kids are. And so on a Sunday, Al and I, at kind of coffee, we'll generally just seek out the children and the young people and just check in. But that tiny, tiny little thing just makes such a difference. Our eldest daughter, Hannah, is now 21. She's just graduated this year. And she's come back from her uni church. And one of the things that has blown her away, we know has had such a massive positive impact on her, is that when she comes back to our home church, so many people remember her. They remember her name. They remember that she's at York. They remember that she's studying psychology and education. And they check in and they want to know how she's doing. And she's like, Mom, I can't believe. Like, all these women, they just know where I am and they know what I'm doing. And they seem genuinely interested in me. And that tiny thing has had such a positive impact on her. And it's really when at times she has struggled to find welcome in church, really has appreciated that welcome when she comes home. So it makes a difference, just the tiny things, and I think sometimes we dismiss those tiny things, but just remembering a kid's name, saying hello. How often at coffee do we kind of, and even welcome at the front door, we kind of welcome people in and we talk to the adults, and we don't look down and we don't talk to the kids. So how do we do welcome as a family in the church? How do we interact and engage with all of the people that make up our beautiful family and chat? So yeah, it makes a difference. What we are doing makes a massive, massive difference. And we kind of can put a bit of a suit of armour on our kids, because the more of those positive inputs they have, the more of those safe adults they have in their life, we're kind of strengthening them against all of the rubbish stuff that happens when life is tricky and difficult. And that's not good, because there is more good news. Because in neuroscience, we've also discovered something called brain plasticity, which is amazing. So we've already learned that the brain has this incredible ability to change, to rebuild and to heal. So much so that damage that has been caused through adverse experiences, like trauma, can be repaired. And one of the main ways that that happens, interestingly, is again through positive interactions with safe caregivers. So not only can a safe relationship act like a protective armour, it can also create opportunity for healing. Basically, as people, as we look and discover more about how our bodies and brains work, we're discovering that we're wired for connection. Which for us as followers of Jesus should be no surprise, because the heart of our relationship with God is about relationship. God himself is about relationship, Father, Son and Holy Spirit. We are wired for connection. And actually, the fact that connection has the opportunity for healing, for me, has Jesus written all over it. That damage that has been caused by trauma, tragedy, abuse, neglect, can be healed through safety and connection and love. The potential for healing and redemption is literally built into our DNA. That's a Jesus thing for me. And I believe that the church has a massive role to play in that healing process. Isaiah 58 verse 12, kind of giving you all my favourite verses today. But Isaiah 58:12 is another. And every time I read this verse, literally everything within me cries out, yes, amen, that's what I want to be part of. It says, your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called repairer of broken walls, restorer of streets with dwellings. Like, that is what I want. I want to be part of that. I want to be part of bringing repair, and I want to be part of bringing restoration. But the thing is, if we are going to be repairers and restorers in our communities, if we're going to bring safety, relationship, and care that enables healing, we need to understand how we do that safely. How we bring safe approaches and how we create safe spaces, which is what we're talking about when we're talking about trauma-informed. That is essentially what trauma-informed approach is, that our approach, our processes, our programs are all brought for a place of understanding trauma and how it affects people and the need to feel safe and how we enable people to feel safe. And as we're mindful of that, in everything we do, we create safe spaces within our churches and we create opportunities for the broken walls, which I think we see really easily. We do not have to look far in our communities to see broken walls and communities that are broken down. So basically, what we need to think about is how we don't wade into delicate and vulnerable places and kind of huge wellies, causing more damage as we stomp over trauma. What we want to do is tread lightly, carefully, and mindfully with Jesus. And that is what we're going to get to in the second part of this session. But I'm going to pause there, and I just thought it would be helpful, having thrown a little bit of kind of a theory of trauma and what it is, to just pause for a wonder moment. There's different types of wonder. I like to do a how, wow, and a wow with our kids. We used to do it as a family. Like, one thing that's made you go, I wonder how that works. One thing that's made you go, wow, that's really cool, wow. And bow is like, what have you start yourself, like the wonder that is you. But we're going to do just a how, wow today. So on your tables, as we've begun to think about trauma, is there anything that you're adding to those questions, or one of those questions that you talked about at the beginning that's come back to mind, where you're like, I wonder about that, how does that work? Or is there something that you've heard already that's made you go, wow, we need to think about that a little bit more? So a little bit of a wonder moment at your tables, and a how and wow, and we'll chat, and you might hear a little bit better when we chat together. Great. I'll give you a couple of minutes than I did last time. Okay. And let you draw your conversation. Shall we start with some wows? Do you want to shout? Shall I come round so that we can all hear it? Is that helpful? Just stick your hand up if you've got a wow to shout out. Anyway. It's always good when it's a chat group. Any wows? Yeah, thank you. So the question was, how do we think about how our adults are reliable? So what it's brilliant because it segues nicely into what we're going to next about some important trauma principles, and we're going to look at being safe. And I think the key in that kind of stat from the Trauma Council around the more safe adults that a child has in their life and trust and feel safe talking to, the greater reduction they have in having mental health condition. The key in that stat, that was a long stat, just like that. The key in that stat is the word safe. We're talking about safe adults. We're not just saying that any adult being in a child's life is just going to make a difference, which is why we really, really need to seek to understand trauma, and we need to seek to understand what is going on. Effectively, if you're going to journey up with anyone, it's all about building relationship. That's the key, I think, in any children's and youth ministry. It is the same when we're looking at bringing an inclusive and welcoming environment for children with additional needs. How do we learn our kids? How do we get to know them? How do we know what makes them tick and what causes them to be uncomfortable? How do we build effective relationship? And how do we get to know our kids? And so it is that kind of building relationship, but it's safe adults. It's not just about throwing anyone at them. And how do we seek to do that well? Thanks. Yeah, brilliant. Again, it is that recognition, which is why we need to understand trauma. So you need to understand that we just go, yeah, we're going to build a relationship. But actually, we are asking a lot of our children for whom life has told them that people aren't to be trusted. We're asking a lot for them to trust us, and that's going to take a long thing. So please don't hear that what we're just going to do is, here's these lovely things and do this, and everything's going to be great. Because journeying with people who have had really difficult life experiences can be challenging. We were talking on our table in the last session about welcome, and the honesty that welcome is messy, and welcome is a bit tricky sometimes. It is not just, we use that word welcome and think of it as like, oh, we're all welcoming here, it's like a nice big hug, but actually there's a grit to being welcoming, because it can be tricky, and there is a real grit to journeying with children and adults who've experienced trauma, because life has told them that the world is not safe and the world is not kind. So journeying with people like that and building a relationship takes time, takes effort, and it definitely isn't linear. Sometimes it can feel like 1 step forward and 3 steps back, but flipping heck, what a joy when we take a step forward, and what a joy to be part of God's healing process in someone's life, even if that is gritty and hard work. Thanks. Okay, let's keep going. So, what might it look like to bring a trauma-sensitive and kind of trauma-informed approach? So we're going to think of 4 principles of a trauma-informed approach. And these I kind of drew from the SAMSA report that I mentioned earlier. They came up with 6, and I've tried to kind of like make it accessible and a good kind of starting point. And I quite like an acronym, which is interesting, because when I was teaching, I used to kind of head up our support for children with dyslexia, and acronyms not but somehow I've been drawn into the world of acronyms. So we're going to look at STEM to help us think through 4 principles of a trauma-informed approach, and kind of I hope think about why each of those is important. So the first principle of that trauma-informed approach is that it is safe. And I think that is for a couple of different reasons. First of all, we need to be really hot with our safeguarding. Because for our children who have experienced that life is and the world is not safe, it is absolutely imperative that we create environments that are safe. That we do I think sometimes safeguarding can feel like a hoop jump and something that just gets in the way of us getting on with it. But actually, it's baseline, it is a privilege, and it's absolutely crucial. If our churches aren't safe, we're not doing things the Jesus way, because Jesus was safe. So we really need to put safeguarding first and foremost in what we are doing, and we need to take it really, really seriously. Because for children who have been unsafe, they need to know what it feels like to be safe. But also, there's a wider element to that safety as we think about felt safety. Children who have experienced particularly kind of developmental extreme trauma, you can see them in a room because they're the little meerkats, I call them. They're the kids who are constantly kind of poking their head and looking around. They are always alert and ready for danger. And in a school setting, what we often do with those children, or sometimes do with those children, is they can also be the children that are a bit bristly and can kind of have challenging behaviour because they're struggling with a whole load of stuff. So we take them and we put them right in front of the teacher, I've sat in so many classrooms that have done this, because they're the kids that need extra support, and what we do is we put them right at the front and mean that there's a whole group of kids sat behind them, and they have no idea what is going on behind them, and that is the last place that feels safe. So even being mindful of what felt safety feels like, sometimes those children will be the ones that will be much happier hugging a wall, because there's nothing behind them that they can't see. They can assess the space in front of them because they're always alert and looking out for danger. So notice the meerkats and be mindful of felt safety. We haven't got time to unpack loads and loads of stuff in this session, but on my website there's a free tool called the Stars of Safety. Al likes to laugh that I put the free to freelance because I'm like, it's good, just like how we make it available. So there's a tool called the Stars of Safety, which you can grab off there, but it just takes you through thinking through 5 really simple starter things to think about to help children feel safe. So it's like, how do we think about structure? How do we think about transitions? Do we think about having good anchors, things that help children feel safe? Good routine, thinking about the sensory impact. So have a look at that. And the other thing to explore is a brilliant tool called PACE. I do training on PACE, but look it up as well. And that is a brilliant tool created by a guy called Dan Hughes, who basically does therapy with children who've experienced extreme trauma. And so he created something called PACE that describes the approach. How do we go about doing what we are doing? Because often we think about the what we're doing, and we don't always think about the how and how we're going about it. And the how often is where it's going to make it or break it. And so PACE, another acronym, stands for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. How do we approach the children as we interact with them? Again, I could do a whole session on PACE, so I'm just kind of signposting to it and saying, have a look at that, it's helpful. So safe is the first principle. The second principle of a trauma-informed approach is that it needs to be trustworthy, which is building a little bit on what you mentioned about safe adults. Children who've experienced trauma have learned that the world is not safe. They've also learned that people can't be trusted. We are going to need to work extra hard and be consistently trustworthy to even begin to start building a little bit of trust on occasions, maybe once a week. And things that we can do that help that are things like bringing a calm approach, so not being erratic or unpredictable, using our words to explain what we're doing. I'm smiling because we're doing this now, and next we're going to do this. Being as calm and predictable as we can possibly be. And the other thing that really helps with trustworthiness is how do we bring genuine care? Children that have experienced trauma get really good at reading faces, because they need to be good at building faces, because they need to be able to predict where danger is. So they need to understand if a face is looking grumpy, this may not be safe for me and I need to make myself scarce. They get really good at reading faces. And so if you are saying one thing, it's really nice to have you here, but inside you're thinking, oh no, they've turned up again and they're really, really tricky. They will see that in your face. We need to bring genuine care. And genuine kind of walking alongside. So being trustworthy, not saying one thing, doing another, saying one thing, doing that thing. The third principle, are you with me? We're rattling through a lot of stuff. Third principle is how can we be empowering? At the heart of it, most experience of trauma is an experience of a loss of control. Something bad happened, and you couldn't do anything about it. You couldn't get yourself out of that space. And there is a kind of, the guy that is the godfather, really, of exploring, kind of bringing language to trauma. There's a guy called Bessel van der Kolk. He wrote a book called The Body Keys of School. And in that, he describes how, when we were talking earlier actually about how two different people can experience the same event, and one is kind of okay and one is massively affected by it. He describes how research they've done to notice the impact of kind of powerlessness. So in a car accident, two people can experience the same thing. One can get out of the car and escape from it, the other is stuck. That kind of stuckness, you're powerless in that situation. That's kind of that experience of loss of control. And so how do we help children to feel in control as much as they can? So hang on, I've lost my space. Better one, I've got it. So this is a quote that he says, I shot ahead of myself. He says, being able to move and do something to protect oneself is a critical factor in determining whether or not a horrible experience will leave long-lasting scars. So that being disempowered, unable to move or do something, is a major aspect of trauma experience. And so feeling a loss of control in any situation, however seemingly insignificant that loss of control feels, can be a huge trigger for a child that has lived with an experience of trauma. So voice and choice I find really helpful to help us think through this. Are we making space for a child's voice to be heard? And is there an opportunity for choice within it? And we're not talking about anything goes, because if any child can do anything they want, that is not going to be a space that feels safe for anyone. But things like fixed choices can be really helpful. It's really interesting, I find it really interesting in our churches how quickly we kind of just follow a school example. So this is a real issue for teachers in schools, the whole kind of voice and choice, because ultimately your job is, you've been given a curriculum and you have to deliver it. And that's what you're told to do, that's what your job is. We could talk about whether that should be the job or not. I'm happy to have that conversation. But, not right now. But in our churches, we don't have that. We're not constrained by that. And if we've got a child that really does not want to join in with a running around game, why do they have to? They don't. And so having that fixed choice of, if this is not something you feel comfortable with, here's an alternative, here's our quiet space, or whatever it is. But create an opportunity for a child to express, this is not something I want to do, thank you very much. Whether we agree with it or not, that's their choice. But having their voice and an opportunity to make a choice within that space can help a space feel so much more empowering and therefore feel safer. So being empowering. And then the fourth one is mutual. Now, I've played with this word a little bit because it fits nicely with STEM. What we're talking about really is a collaborative space. How do we journey with rather than doing things to? And a quote that I kind of hang on to as a little bit of a mantra, and mentioned pretty much in every training I do, and it works is really important in the SEND space as well, is nothing about me without me. So for many children who've experienced trauma, there's been an aspect of their experience that has involved an imbalance of power. And we really need to be mindful of how that experience has shaped their understanding of the world around them and their responses to it. And so enabling them and bringing them into the conversation. And when we're thinking about support needs, to kind of extend this a little bit from just trauma, but when we're looking at support needs, do we talk with families, do we talk with the children and find out what they love and what's helpful for them, but bringing them in and having a collaborative approach and nothing about me without me. And often, when we do it without them, let's be honest, it comes from a really good place. Because generally, what we are seeing is a child that is struggling and we really want to help. So we jump in and we decide what that help might look like. And so that is coming from a really, really good place. But unfortunately, accidentally, we can trample all over in our wellies that need to be collaborative when we do that. So being mindful of the need to include and be mutual, being collaborative in our conversation is super important. So, being safe, being trustworthy, being empowering, and being mutual. And for me, all of that holds together in the verse that I mentioned this morning. That's Psalm 3 verse 3. For you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts my head high. You're a shield, you are safe and you are trustworthy. You are a lifter of heads, empowering and mutual, collaborative. I think we've got our example and our pattern written out for us. Why I love the PACE approach that I mentioned earlier, and when I do the PACE training, we talk about this. If you look at the example of Jesus, what we see is a PACE approach oozing out of it. We could take each one and think of Bible stories when we've seen Jesus be playful, when we've seen him be accepting, when we've seen him bring curiosity or be empathic. It's all God stuff and it's all Jesus stuff. It's just kind of teasing it out of Scripture and having a think. So, we're going to pause for another Wonder Woman. We're also, just to let you know, I think, heading for an early finish so we can get first dibs on lunch, which feels like a really good thing. But let's just kind of have a moment to think. We'll do another Wonder Moment, and then I've got a kind of reflective activity to finish. But let's have a really good kind of thrash it out on our tables. And then if you've got some questions or thoughts or reflections, there is wisdom and learning in this space. So let's sharpen each other and bring our voices in that and share as well. So we'll make space for that. Let's go. Okay. I wonder if I scared people off last time by the thought of me coming around the microphone, so I promise I won't do that this time. It would be really great to hear just a little bit of what you were chatting about in your tables, just so that we can all learn from each other. So, great if anyone is brave to just share some of their thoughts. Yes, thanks. Yeah, great. Thank you. Anyone have thoughts on what that might look like in practice? Yes, sorry. So they were sharing that the whole nothing about me without me is really, really helpful to think through, and how do we empower children's voice. And it might sound really obvious, but it's an easy thing to forget about and not do. And that's so I was thinking, anyone got any practical thoughts of what that might look like? Great, so that empowering of fixed choices, yes, brilliant, thank you. Great. Any other table to share? Thanks, that's helpful. Yes, thank you. Brilliant. I love that. So just sharing that they had some older children and they sat down and said, what is it you want, rather than assume they knew. And the surprise, I love the surprise because kids are really wise. They're really good. I did a really good activity once when I was in, so my background was in education, I was a Senko, and we had a child who was a runner, which is always a little bit scary, and the site was not as safe as it could have been. And we gave him like a video camera and said, we'd really like you to help us think about how we make the site safer, and to walk around with a video camera and show us what an insight of that door is unlocked. It's the door he would run through. That door's unlocked, and so that doesn't make safe, that's not a safe space. But it's that notice, children have wisdom and they understand themselves sometimes a lot better than we think. And so involving them in the conversation is really, really helpful. One more table. Yes, thank you. Yeah, brilliant. Really good question, and one that comes up quite a lot. So when I do training and I go through the stars of safety tool, and one of those is about routine but anchor, and people are really good anchors, is what I always say. But I think that's a challenge because in lots of churches we're working on a rota system and volunteers is really, really tricky. So there are different ways we can bring that predictability. We can be predictable by having a really good conversation within our teams about our approach, about our how. On my table there's a thing called the Flourish model that I've created. I'm just about to launch some new training on that. But that is recognising the importance of, first of all, understanding our why, what we talked about this morning, and how we identify our values. Yes, talking about our what and some of the kind of things like the stars of safety, but super importantly, our how. How do we go about doing what we are doing? And that is something that is often super, super woolly. It's like it's implied. And actually what we really need to do is to make the implicit explicit, to be really clear about it, to really talk in our teams, this is how we want to go about it, which is why I love PACE, because what that does is give you a good kind of language to start talking about, this is how we're going to do it. So being predictable in our approach and consistent in our approach is really, really helpful. Routine within our sessions, so we always start our session like this. Or we know that after story it's always juice or whatever it is, but building routine. Children are creatures of habit. I think sometimes it's the adults that have an issue with that, we have to get over ourselves. And I think sometimes it's because, if we're really honest, particularly for those that are planning the sessions, I wonder if sometimes we think, man, if I keep doing the same thing, the team are going to think I'm rubbish, because I don't have any better ideas, because we do the same thing all the time. And so we end up then trying to prove that we're really cool, we're really innovative, we have all these good ideas. But actually, children love doing the same things. And I think of toddlers, how many times, when our girls were little, they'd love just be launching off the stairs, which isn't actually possibly thinking of the same, not the best thing. Because at any point they'd be like, Daddy, I'm coming, catch me. And Al would have to run in and grab them. But they would do it again and again and again. And the question, the words out of their mouth would always be, do to me what you did to Hannah, do to me what you did to Ellie, over and over and over and over and over and over. Again, kids love routine, and so we don't need to be afraid of that, I don't think, and building it in can be really, really helpful. And then the other thing, which I think we've already talked about in this section, is how we build connection with kids. So just because you're only on rota once a week doesn't mean that you then don't talk to children weeks 2, 3, and 4 in the month. We're still part of the team, and there's still kids in our church, and kids are fun, and let's hang out and let's check in with them. So we can also build that consistency by being consistent adults in their life, even if we're only on rota once a week or once a month. Is that helpful? Brilliant, thank you. I don't want to lose our river. Yes, go. Okay, so that's probably a bigger topic than we can talk about right now, but there are a few things we can pick up on for our safeguarding. So I don't want to do safeguarding training without doing it thoroughly. That's why I'm kind of edging away from it. But I think we just really need to be confident in what our processes are, because actually a squeeze on the shoulder, a reassuring hand squeeze, and actually for fizzy bodies, deep pressure is a really important way for some children of helping them feel safe. So a squeeze of the hand is a good thing to do. And so the whole kind of we can't touch children, actually I think we can if we do it safely and we do it within our child protection policies, and we kind of, huddling a child off to one corner when no one else is around is obviously not going to be okay, but if we're in a visible space. So I think that is making sure that as a team, if you're feeling anxious about safeguarding, that suggests to me that within a team there's a little bit more work to do about really helping a team feel like what are our processes, and do we all know them, and are we all in the same space? Because what we don't want to do with safeguarding is tread really gently and fearfully Because actually, fear is never a good thing. Like the Bible tells us over and over again, not fear, and that perfect love casts out fear. And so we want to bring a loving, confident approach of what's safeguarding, but we need to be confident in order to do that. And that means we need to talk about it well. So maybe having a conversation with your team around, we need to be a bit smarter about what safeguarding looks like so that we can feel confident and safe to do it well, because your safety is as important as the children's safety. Sorry, that's a very tiny, come and have a chat and we can talk more. That's a very tiny little thing because it's a big topic that's tricky to go. But yeah, good safeguarding, but always being confident about that. And so we all know that is important. And we put the last slide up to just leave with you, and that's a head, heart, hands reflection. So just before we rush off and grab the best sandwiches, what's made you think your head? What from this session has resonated with your heart that you want to think more about and that's got you going and you want to sit with a bit more? And what you're going to put into practice, your hands. So maybe just to take 30 seconds to just have a quick think about that. And I'm just going to pray actually while I was going to do that, because this is tricky stuff that we've talked about. So Lord, we thank you for this opportunity to be in this space, to be challenged in our thinking. Lord, we thank you for the willingness. Thank you that this is a room of people who are here because they are keen to journey well with children who are struggling. And so I pray for each person in this room, Lord, that you would speak to us, that you would continue to be challenging our thinking, challenging what we're passionate about, and Lord, giving us wisdom so that we know what it looks like to journey well with struggling children. But we want to be repairers of broken laws in our communities. So would you continue to be building us up, leading the way, and thank you that as we step into these dark spaces, you step with us. Amen.